Welcome everyone to the CERTL Network's event on using an ePortfolio to promote reflection and integration of knowledge. This is the fourth and final event in our series on engaging students with high impact teaching practices brought to us by IUPUI, one of 38 universities that's a member of the CERTL Network. If you're new to CERTL or unfamiliar with us, we are the Center for the Integration of Research, Teaching, and Learning. And like I just said, we're a network of universities around the US and in Canada working to make the sciences more diverse by changing how they're taught. And what that means in practice, since that's a very broad phrase, is we put together events, workshops, courses to train grad students and postdocs in STEM disciplines how to be inclusive and effective teachers with evidence-based methods. And so this series on engaging students and deepening their learning with high impact practices fits very neatly within that goal. With that introduction, I believe I am turning things over to Tabitha Hardy from IUPUI, who will kick things off with our host and speaker today.
Hi, everybody. We're so excited to have you guys here today and really excited to share with you once again about these high impact practices. I'm Tabitha Hardy, and I'm the Interim Assistant Vice Chancellor for Graduate Education and the Assistant Dean for Student Development and Academic Affairs at IUPUI. And this is part 4 of our CERTLcast series on engaging students through high impact teaching practices. So it's bittersweet for us because we're wrapping things up, but hopefully you guys have gained a lot and have learned a lot throughout the session. So today's session will focus on ePortfolios. And I'm going to introduce Jerry today, who is a professor of sociology and the executive associate dean in the Institute for Engaged Learning at IUPUI. He works closely with the Associate Vice Chancellor for Undergraduate Education and the Institute for Engaged Learning team and other units to promote the equitable progression of IUPUI's over 20,000 undergrad students. So I'm going to turn it over to Jerry now so that he can introduce our resident ePortfolio expert, Amy Powell.
Thanks, Tabitha. Thanks, Kate. Welcome, everybody. As has been said multiple times, welcome to session 4. Looking at the list of participants, even though we've only been together 4 times in the last month, I see names that I recognize, believe it or not. And so thank you all for participating in this last session. I'm doing this session with like the previous ones, I brought an expert in each of these high impact practices. And for today, I brought my colleague, Amy Powell, who works with me in the Institute for Engaged Learning. She's our executive director of ePortfolio in the Institute and really is responsible for a lot of the ePortfolio effort on our campus. Prior to her work in ePortfolio, she was really involved in leading our learning community effort, which is another high impact practice that we're not talking about as part of the series, which is embedded within our first year experience, which is another high impact practice. So Amy has a lot of experience with high impact practices on our campus. At the very first session, I introduced the IUPUI taxonomies, and Amy's played a key role in developing the ePortfolio taxonomy, the learning community, and played a big role in the capstone taxonomy as well. So thrilled to have Amy here to share her expertise with ePortfolio and how you might think about integrating it into your teaching, or maybe even into your own professional life as graduate students, and how you might be able to use an ePortfolio in doing your own integrative learning. So the session's going to be structured very similar to how we've done things in the past. So we do have a slide deck that I'd like to start off just sharing my screen. And to start off, we'd like to, as we've done in the past, talk a little bit about our agenda for today. We're going to review high impact practices very briefly. Similar to the previous sessions, we'll do a quick Menti poll. And then I'll turn it over to Amy, and she's going to walk through these 3 questions. What is ePortfolio? What are ePortfolio practices? And then we're going to give you some time for exploration and talking a little bit about our next steps. Just a brief refresher, what are high impact practices? In 2008, George Koo identified a handful of practices that research showed promoted deep learning, student engagement, and student success among students. Things like undergraduate research and community engagement and service learning, capstone projects and internships. And over the last several years, that list has grown And the most recent one, number 11, is ePortfolio. Research has shown that ePortfolio, like all of these other high impact practices that you see on the list, promote integrative learning, deep learning for students, increase student engagement between the students and themselves, as well as students, faculty, and staff. And they increase retention rates for students and their persistence towards graduation. So if you watch a recording of the first session where we dive into a lot of the attributes of high impact practices and their benefits, but these are what we're referring to, these high impact educational experiences, the list that you see here. And they're also available on the AAC&U website as well that you can go take a look at. So as we've done in the past, we have a Menti poll for you. So if you would go to menti.com, I'm going to launch the poll in a second, and we're going to type in that code. I'm going to stop my share here, and I'm going to go to the Menti poll very quickly. So give me one sec. Here we go. Can you all see the Menti poll? And let me go ahead and present it. So what we're trying to do here is get a sense of where you all as participants are at in terms of whether or not you've used these different high impact practices. We did something very similar in the previous polls, and we're doing it here again. We'd like to get a sense of who's used an ePortfolio, who hasn't, or who doesn't know. So I'll give you a minute or two to turn that in. Got about 66 participants in the session right now, so you could do the math on these percentages in terms of the percentage of people who have used each one. I'll give folks another minute or two to, actually another 20 seconds to respond to the poll. And this is helping me and Amy figure out where you are as an audience. Also a little bit of engagement to sort of think about, you know, your prior knowledge with ePortfolio and how we can leverage that into learning today. So what we're seeing is a lot of folks, the majority, have no experience with ePortfolio or using one, which is different. If you recall our last session where we did undergraduate research, the majority of folks did have experience with that as a high impact practice when you were all undergraduates. But here we're seeing that for the majority of folks, the vast majority of folks, there is no prior experience with ePortfolio. So this next Menti question might be challenging if you don't have any experience with ePortfolio. So I'm going to jump to the next one, if it lets me. In one or two words, how would you describe the benefit of an ePortfolio? So for the 25% that have had experience with ePortfolio, or if you know about ePortfolio, what do you think the benefits are of it? In one or two words. And you're making Amy really happy right now with some of the words that we're seeing on here, at least one of them. Great, keep going. Another 30 seconds. This is good, folks. Give folks another 10 seconds. Amy, while I have this up, is there anything you want to share based on what you're seeing here?
Well, this is fantastic. Definitely there are words jumping out at me, in particular, you know, reflection and synthesis, showcase, comprehensive, application, visible learning. These are all things that I'm going to be talking about when we talk about ePortfolio. So fantastic to see this here.
Awesome. Okay, folks, I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to turn it over to Amy. Let me close the Menti poll here. Okay, Amy, it's all yours.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for having me today. I'm going to spend a little time talking with you about ePortfolio and you know, what it is, and give you some ideas, ways you can think about it and apply it in your own work and in your teaching. And so my hope is that you walk away with some level of understanding of what ePortfolio is, both as a product and as a process, and both are important depending on where your students are. And so I'd like to start with this slide here which comes from NILOA. And it's really great because I think it's important to put ourselves in our students' shoes and really think about what is their experience as an undergraduate student. So they're taking courses, they're completing assignments, and in your work with teaching courses, this may be where you're going to be focusing your time and energy with ePortfolio and thinking about integrating ePortfolio into courses and in particular assignments. But students are also thinking about their degree program, they're taking general education courses, and then there's all this learning and activity that's happening outside the classroom. And that's things like being involved in the co-curriculum, whether that's on campus or right now, a lot of this is happening off campus in students' home communities as we're online. But they're also working. So students are working one, maybe two, sometimes three jobs, sometimes on campus, sometimes off campus, or a mix. Maybe they've transferred to your institution, or maybe they've started there. So students have a lot going on. And the wonderful thing about ePortfolio is that it really helps students capture their learning in all these different places and bring them together, to reflect on those experiences, to integrate them, to take the things that they have learned and bring with them from outside the classroom, from their home lives, their life experiences, what they bring to the classroom with them, pulling those pieces together. And then as they're engaging in these high impact practices, ePortfolio being one, so the process of creating the ePortfolio, but also taking classroom skills and applying them through other engaged learning programs, they're tying these threads together. So I thought I would just start with a definition of ePortfolio that we use at IUPUI. And that is that ePortfolios are a framework for learning. They're a space for students to collect evidence of their learning, for students to reflect on their learning, a place where they can articulate their learning, and then create new learning over time. So a student is going to start their ePortfolio. Ideally, they'll start it as a freshman, and they will continue to develop that ePortfolio over time through their capstone experience and beyond. But by collecting evidence of learning and reflecting on their learning and articulating what they're learning, not just in the classroom, but in those experiential activities and those experiences they're having outside the classroom, whether in their home life, work environment, whatever it is, tying those threads together, they can see themes, they can start to understand who they are, they deepen their learning. And through that process, which is the process part of ePortfolio, they can then make intentional decisions about where they want to go with their education. And so that's a nice segue into talking about some of the benefits of ePortfolio. So ePortfolio practice, which is the process, can really help students integrate their learning across the curriculum, the co-curriculum, and those experiences outside school that they're having. And this contributes to a more meaningful and purposeful educational experience. And also in terms of as an institution or as a faculty member, ePortfolio is great for having rich information for assessment, which can be helpful. So, a student may complete an assignment which you're assessing for, are they meeting your learning outcomes? But as they capture learning over time and reflect and integrate learning, what we can start to see is we can see across the curriculum, are they learning the key concepts we want them to learn? Are they applying them? Are they having meaningful experiences? So ePortfolio is great for assessment, which can lead to improvement of curricula, improvement of teaching, and improvement of student learning. So I'm going to pause there and go ahead and share a couple of examples of ePortfolio. So it's one thing to talk about a definition, but it's another thing to actually look at some ePortfolios and say, okay, this is what she's talking about. So I'm just going to share a couple of examples with you. So this student is Austin, and he is a freshman majoring in biomedical engineering. And so an ePortfolio is much like a personal website, but in particular, we're focused on learning. So we want our students to capture their learning over time, to integrate those experiences, to reflect on those experiences and articulate who they are as a student, as a scholar, and as a professional. So we at IUPUI use course networking as our ePortfolio platform. Certainly there are many others out there that work in a very similar way. So you can see Austin here, his title. He has a very brief bio about himself, and he has tagged some skills throughout his ePortfolio, which you can see here. The main body of the ePortfolio are showcases, and in course networking, they're called showcases, and other platforms, they may be called something else. Maybe in Wix or Weebly, these might be subpages of the navigation, but this is where the bulk of the content of the ePortfolio lives. And he has 3 showcases here, a section about himself, his education, and his career plans. And you can see he has done some pretty in-depth reflection, which he has added to his ePortfolio, talking about who he is, why he's going to school, understanding his strengths, his traits, who he is as a person, and he's added some images there that describe him. Now, in particular, I want to show you this education section where he is really reflecting on his path through his undergraduate degree. So biomedical engineering major with a minor in math. And in here, he's reflecting on, because remember, he's a freshman, some of the things that he is wanting to do in the future. So he mentions undergraduate research, study abroad, internships, volunteer work. And so this is a great place as he's doing this planning for him to start thinking about capturing those experiences when they happen and then adding them to his ePortfolio. So over time, he would continue to add more showcases, or in another platform, it might be more subpages where he's then capturing those experiences. So as a freshman, this is great for planning. And then as he continues on through his undergraduate degree program, he will continue to add experiences to that. So right now I've got another portfolio. I'll give this a second to load. This portfolio is, well, let me see.
Amy, we have a couple of questions in the chat. Sure. So first, is this available to IU students after they graduate? Okay, that's great.
Yes.
And then why wouldn't a LinkedIn page serve the same purpose? And can our participants view these examples themselves if they were to sign up?
Yes, fantastic. All great questions. So yes, so having a platform that students could take with them after they graduate, we saw as being very essential. So yes, their account with Course Networking, it's free for life. So their ePortfolio goes with them. So right now they log in through Canvas, which is our learning management system. But after graduation, they can log in directly to the cn.com to get to their ePortfolio and continue to update it. These are public, so anyone could grab these URLs and look at these ePortfolios. Anyone could go to the cn.com, and it looks like someone put that in the chat pod, the link. Can go to the cn.com and browse ePortfolios. There's a way to search, so you could search by major, you could search by interest, you can search by different areas and view different ePortfolios. Students have control over what is and isn't visible. So a student could hide their ePortfolio from public view if they chose. They can also lock certain showcases if they choose, password protect them, or just hide them from public view. So students do have control over what is seen. So yes, the things I'm showing you are publicly available. So some of these the students I know, some of these I found by going to the CN and looking for some STEM examples of ePortfolios. In terms of why use something like course networking and creating an ePortfolio versus using a LinkedIn page, this is a question that I get pretty frequently. And what I would encourage you to think about are, what is the difference in the learning goals from creating an ePortfolio versus the learning goals of creating a LinkedIn profile? So LinkedIn is very professionally focused. It's very career focused, whereas an ePortfolio is really focused on student learning over time. So as a freshman, the things that students are putting in their ePortfolio, these are not things that they would put into a LinkedIn profile. Now, the thing about ePortfolio being a process is that, you know, freshman, sophomore year, they're capturing experiences, they're reflecting on experiences, they're making connections. As they get to be a junior and senior, now they're curating. So they're looking at their portfolio, they're continuing to add content to it, but they're really thinking about, how do I shape this portfolio to be professional that I might share with potential employers? So through that curation process, it may turn into something that is more like LinkedIn, or maybe they might take pieces from their ePortfolio and include it in their LinkedIn profile. In terms of like what platform, that doesn't matter so much, because a student on their resume would just put a link to their ePortfolio, you know, whether they use SAN or Wix or Weebly or other platforms is not so important, so much as that they are thoughtfully curating it and then sharing that link. And there are some professions where using LinkedIn is very important. And of course, those students we would encourage to use LinkedIn as well as developing an ePortfolio, because of course we have different learning goals with the ePortfolio. Okay, so very briefly, I'll show you this ePortfolio, and then I want to kind of jump into some more information to help introduce some ePortfolio practices to you, and then give you an opportunity to kind of dive deeper into those practices and have some discussion. So this is Julie, also a freshman, and she has several showcases here. She participated in the Bridge program, which is our program where students, freshmen, arrive to campus a week early and engage in some activities to get to know the campus better, to get to know their faculty better, and to get to know each other better. She also has some other sections there, but in particular, I thought I would point out that she is reflecting on each of those 5 days of Bridge, and at the end, she writes a conclusion to her reflection. And so I would really encourage you, as you're thinking about ePortfolio, to think about how you can structure student reflections so that they're reflecting in the moment, but then there's also something that integrates or tie those threads together, whether that happens mid-semester, end of semester, you know, however you're scaffolding that over time. So they're reflecting in the moment it happens, but then also tying the threads together. And in particular, I wanted to point out her career showcase, because she came in, you know, knowing she wanted to major in biology and thinking she wanted to go to medical school. And through her reflection, she had applied for a position in a lab, a research lab, and was engaging in this research, and turned out she loved it and realized she really wanted to do more of that and pursue that. And so this is a wonderful part of ePortfolio where students are reflecting on their experiences and taking what they're learning from that reflection and making intentional decisions. So then she has now shifted her academic and career plan based on that reflection. Just to give you a little different flavor of ways ePortfolios can be organized, this is Dylan. He's a junior in media arts and science and informatics. And he has organized his ePortfolio around some particular skills in his field. So video production, web development, and digital design. And students really have ownership over the ways they can organize their ePortfolio. So in talking about video production, he actually embeds sample videos of the things that he's done. In talking about web development, he links to these different pieces that he's created. So ePortfolio is great because you can have the evidence of learning right there, shown right there. Now, this last student is not a STEM major, but I wanted to just show very briefly yet another way a student might organize their portfolio. So she organized her ePortfolio around skills that employers are looking for. So digital technology and creativity, work ethic, time management, written communication, oral communication, and innovation. And through her showcases, she highlights the work that she's done at one of her jobs, and then writes about how those skills are transferable. And she does that in each of her showcases. So just to give you some different ideas about ways you might structure an ePortfolio. So I'm going to hop back into my PowerPoint here. Oh, there it goes. Okay, I want to just briefly touch base on the chat because I'm seeing some things pop up and I want to make sure I'm answering questions. Question about promoting ePortfolio beyond our course. Yes, I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes here, so I'll hold on that one. The programming, so is the programming run through a teaching and learning center or department? So my office, the ePortfolio Initiative Office, is in the Institute for Engaged Learning, where we do professional development around different engaged learning practices, but certainly we partner with our Center for Teaching and Learning. And so I work strategically across campus with whole departments to integrate ePortfolio into whole degree programs. And I also work with individual faculty who are interested in implementing ePortfolio in a single course. Okay, so very briefly, I want to share our campus vision for ePortfolio at IUPUI just to give you a sense of the scale, because we're teaching individual courses, but we also want to keep in mind the big picture with ePortfolio, because that's where we get the most benefit. So at IUPUI, we want all of our undergraduate students to create, develop, and engage with ePortfolio iteratively from their point of entry to IUPUI through their culminating experience. And the way that we do this is by embedding ePortfolio throughout the curriculum and the co-curriculum. So starting in our first year experience with the kickoff in the first year seminar, culminating in the capstone, which can take many different forms. And then those being the bookends, then all these places in between. So in the general education, in key disciplinary courses, internships, career courses, service learning, community engaged learning, undergraduate research, all these different places. The idea being that if a student's degree program is integrating ePortfolio throughout the whole degree program, great. But if it hasn't, students are still bumping into ePortfolio all throughout their undergraduate experience and are creating their ePortfolio iteratively over time. So you're going to notice these places where we've embedded ePortfolio. Many of these are high impact practices. And I would note that this is a really great benefit of ePortfolio. Sometimes it's referred to as a meta high impact practice because it's such a fantastic way of collecting these experiences in other high impact practices, collecting the application, the reflection, evidence of learning, and creating a whole picture of a student's experience. Okay, so now I want to dive into some ePortfolio practices. And this is really, I think, the meat of the session and really what you guys are going to be diving into in the breakout rooms momentarily. So at IUPUI, Jerry mentioned earlier, we created a set of high impact practice taxonomies. And in particular, I'm going to share with you the ePortfolio HIP taxonomy. And what we did as a campus is we outlined 4 attributes that we believe lead to a high impact student experience with ePortfolio. And this taxonomy directs all of our professional development work. Faculty use it for planning and implementing and assessing ePortfolio work. And then it's also a great tool as a program office for us to look at ePortfolio fidelity. So is ePortfolio being implemented on our campus using best practices? And so these are the 4 main attributes, and I'll pull up the taxonomy in a moment, but the link is there where you can click on the link. It's in the chat and download a copy, and you'll want to download a copy to use for the activity in a few minutes. So feel free to just go ahead and click on that link. But there are 4 main attributes or 4 big buckets of ePortfolio practice. The first being ePortfolio as curriculum. So when we are integrating ePortfolio into a single course or across a degree program, we're being really thoughtful that learning is happening through ePortfolio. It's integrated into the curriculum. Second, that we're using ePortfolio pedagogies, things like reflection, peer review, social pedagogies, which are not exclusive to ePortfolio, but they are practiced with ePortfolio. The third is that ePortfolio making skills are explicitly taught to students. So things like audience awareness, cohesion, narrative, choosing images, choosing, documents, videos for the ePortfolio that support the narrative, building an ePortfolio with hyperlinks. These are skills that students don't necessarily walk in the door having, and so making sure that we're teaching them how to build an effective ePortfolio. And then the fourth attribute is that ePortfolio assessment is both holistic and aligned with the learning processes and outcomes. And what this means is that when we are assessing ePortfolios, we may be looking at an individual artifact within the ePortfolio, or we may be assessing the ePortfolio holistically, so looking at the whole ePortfolio. So I'm going to flip over here to the taxonomy. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to click that link. I'm going to give you a brief tour, and then we'll do some breakouts where you'll have a chance to really dive in deeper. So the taxonomy starts with a description of ePortfolio, which we've been talking about, the purpose of the taxonomy, which I've also introduced, and some definitions. So if you are one of those people that are new to ePortfolio, here are some definitions that we're using in the taxonomy that may be useful to you. Now, we've aligned our taxonomy with our undergraduate learning outcomes for the institution, and so you'll see them there. The taxonomy starts here, and down this left column here, we have each of those 4 attributes, so it spans 2 pages, the actual taxonomy. So you'll see them there, and then across the top, you're going to notice we have high impact, higher impact, and highest impact. And the way this taxonomy is laid out is that high impact ePortfolio practice takes place when ePortfolio is embedded into a single course. And so that is where I would encourage you to start, right? Because you have control over what you're teaching in your own courses. At the higher impact column is when ePortfolio is integrated into multiple courses or multiple experiences, or maybe across a whole degree program where it is intentionally embedded across, designed to be intentionally embedded. And then the highest impact column is when ePortfolio is included in the entire undergraduate experience, so both curricular, co-curricular, and life experiences, and tying all of those together. So you can see under each column, there are some descriptive bullet points of what implementation of ePortfolio at a high impact level might look like that for each of those attributes. And then on the last page, we have some references here from creating the taxonomy. And so if you're looking for some additional resources or places to look, I would encourage you to check out these resources here in the reference section. So what we're going to do now, and I need to just flip back to my slide, is give you an opportunity to really dive a little bit deeper into ePortfolio practice by taking a closer look at this taxonomy. And so we will put you into breakout rooms for this. But what I would say is take maybe the first, and I think we'll have about 15 minutes to do this. So maybe take the first 5 or so, maybe 7 minutes on your own to browse through the taxonomy, start in that high impact column, and really just take stock of things that you may already be doing. And with the pedagogies, you may be using reflective pedagogies in places other than ePortfolio, and that's great. So I would say, make a check by any of the things you are currently doing. And if you're new to ePortfolio, you may not have any checks, so that's totally fine. Then the next thing would be to look through the taxonomy and see what jumps out at you that you are interested in trying or learning more about. And so circle up to 3 practices not checked that you would be interested in learning more about or potentially implementing in your teaching. And then after you've taken some time on your own to kind of take stock of where you are and kind of think about the things you would like to know more about or try, then as a group, have some conversation in your room, and you can kind of share what you've done with taking stock in your interests. identify some steps that you could take to begin exploring more about ePortfolio, in particular, those steps that you would like to take. So if you have, maybe four people or 5 people in your room, each take a couple of minutes to chat about what your interests are and kind of what you're planning, and get some feedback from each other. So the link is still there on this slide. So you have it if you need to grab it to take a look at the taxonomy. So before we go into the breakout rooms, any questions about what you're going to be doing? Oh, and I see someone put it in the chat. Thank you for doing that. Great. So Kate, do you want to take care of the breakouts?
All right, I will move people into breakouts. You'll be in groups of 4 or 5. You've got these instructions in the chat window to refer to. And you will have 15 minutes, correct, in breakouts? Yes, I see head nods. And you'll get a minute warning when the room's closed so that you can come back to the main room as your conversation wraps up. Once you're in breakouts, if you have questions or need help, there should be an ask for help button at the bottom of the screen that you can click, and one of us facilitators will jump in to help out. With that, I'm going to go ahead and send people to your rooms. All right, our rooms are closed and people are back, so feel free to pick up with the rest of the session.
Great. So if you could just take a moment and briefly type in the chat pod your biggest takeaway from the breakout activity, whether it be your experiences with ePortfolio, things you want to explore, or your action steps. So your choice, your biggest takeaway from the breakout activity. Oh, okay, I'm seeing some notes that the audio is low. Is that better if I lean in? Great. Great, I'm seeing some nice comments here in the chat. Before we did the breakout, I had mentioned earlier that I was going to share an example about working with ePortfolio beyond just your own course, and then I neglected to come back to that. So while you're typing, I thought I would just briefly share some ways that we see that happening with faculty at IUPUI. Most commonly, faculty talking to other faculty. So faculty using ePortfolio, sharing with other faculty what they're doing in their classroom, sharing the ePortfolios that their students are creating. But most notably, I would say we have like capstone instructors who notice student ePortfolios, have particular learning assignments or artifacts that show up pretty regularly from another instructor's course, and go and talk to that instructor about, hey, I'm noticing that students are including your assignment in their ePortfolio. Would you consider giving them a little nudge at the time they create the assignment to include it? So we see ePortfolio spread across degree programs, really in a grassroots way, sometimes starting from the capstone and kind of trickling down backwards. Sometimes when it kicks off in that first year seminar or that first year program, then faculty wanting to continue it and move it forward into classes students are taking at the sophomore and junior level. I'm kind of sifting through your chat comments here. Yeah, so I see a note here about achieving the highest level of impact being contingent on institutional buy-in. And yes, I would say that is true. And it's important, I think, to have buy-in at all levels, but certainly we can have a really, high impact on students and benefit students just incorporating ePortfolio into a single course and then having it grow from there. So whether it's an institutional initiative, which it is at our institution, or it's individual faculty working together and bringing this to fruition, benefits both ways. So I do want to talk about ePortfolio within a single course, because we do have many faculty at IUPUI who incorporate ePortfolio just within a single course. In particular, if there's experiential learning happening, where students will create what we might call a micro ePortfolio. So the whole ePortfolio is about that experience. So we have a professional business writing course where students work with community partners and do a semester-long project, and they capture that whole project in their ePortfolio and then share that with their community stakeholders. So absolutely benefit in creating an ePortfolio just within a single course. And then of course that benefit deepens and catalyzes other learning as students are using ePortfolio in additional courses, but absolutely value within a single course. Great, I see a nice idea about forming cohorts of students for tracking ePortfolios over time. Great, fantastic. Well, I did want to briefly mention a resource for you. This is a Canvas site that we've created at IUPUI, and while we created it for IUPUI, it is publicly available, and all of the content in the Canvas site is under Creative Commons license, so it can all be used by anyone, downloaded, edited, and reused. And this Canvas site, which is our learning management system, has ePortfolio activities and assignments. So if you are looking, you're looking at the taxonomy, you think ePortfolio is a great idea, you want to try it, and then you need to get to the point of, okay, now how do I do this in my classroom? How do I write an ePortfolio assignment? I would encourage you to check out this Canvas site, because it has some grab and go ePortfolio assignments and activities that you can use. Even if you don't belong to IU, you can create a guest account and log in and browse and import all of that content. And if you don't use Canvas, you can still see it and browse it. And you may find, that the text, get some ideas for writing reflection prompts and scaffolding reflection assignments over time. So we are just about at time. So if you have any last pressing questions, feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat, and we'll see what we can address here. Do I integrate ePortfolios with individual development plans? I'm not familiar with the individual development plans. Could you tell me a little more about that?
I asked that question, and an individual development plan is a way for trainees to identify their goals and what they need to meet what skills and different kinds of things they need to be able to reach those goals. And it's meant to be something that you revisit every so often. I don't know, maybe depending on the relationship between the mentor and the mentee, at least once a year.
Sure.
It's very commonly used in the STEM fields.
Gotcha. Okay. Yes, that sounds like perfect for ePortfolio, right? So there could be some ongoing reflection and planning, and then as plans change, some reflection and thoughtfulness as to why that happened, which could be captured. But then additionally, the ePortfolio could capture those experiences that that they're actually having in the moment. So there's the planning piece and then the actual activities happening. So it could capture both of those. Yeah, that sounds like a great fit. Yes, so a question about contact here. I'm going to put my contact information up here. I'm always happy to talk ePortfolio. I'm happy to, meet one-on-one, chat, email, whatever it is, however I can help you. feel free to reach out to me at this email address here. It looks like we might have time for maybe one last question, unless Kate, you have anything you need to do to wrap up?
I just want to flag the link in the chat window for people to fill out a very brief survey on how today went. You will, because we're educators and evaluators, you will of course be getting a longer survey about the overall series that you attended. So look for that in your email after today. And yeah, if anyone has any last questions, please feel free to put them in the chat window. In the meantime, thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Amy, for your session today. A huge thank you to Jerry for doing so much of the work to make this session happen, for reaching out to his collaborators and colleagues to put together a series on high impact practices. And thanks so much to the IUPUI folks behind the scene supporting this series, Anusha, Yi, Tabitha, Jessica. Thank you all very much for your work. And thank you everyone for coming and making these events interactive and engaging. Thanks all.